guys, welcome back to the Pathways to Happiness podcast. My name is Nena Lavonne. I am a life coach that specializes in life transformation and personal development. And today I am so excited because I'm going to be answering the questions that you guys sent in. And I think they are the most interesting questions so far on such a wide range of topics that I really found fascinating. So I am going to try to answer as many as I can possibly get to. And I appreciate you all sending them in and for having such a genuine interest in understanding your own psychology and in the quest for personal growth. So as always, I have to take a moment to thank you all for your support, both here and on the Nena Lavonne YouTube channel, and for helping to spread the word. So thank you so much for that. And let's go ahead and get right into these awesome questions. The first question reads, is it possible for someone to change their personality? And if so, how? I love this question and I've given a lot of thought to it, and personality theory is definitely one of my favorite facets within psychology. So firstly, we have to understand that there are many things that we don't know 100%, and many times there's actually conflicting theories on topics like this that have really polar opposite viewpoints. But having said that, I am still going to give you my own thoughts on this topic. Now, of course, someone could easily argue that we shouldn't change our personality, or why would we want to? That we are who we are, and everyone has their own strengths and gifts, and everyone is their own unique masterpiece. And I completely and totally agree with that. But I also feel like a lot of times we see things in our personalities that can cause setbacks for us or cause suffering for us. So I think in these cases, we could also argue that it would be nice if we could change some of these things. So the question asks, is this actually possible? So a lot of psychologists feel that it would be very difficult. So for example, psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud, who I am sure you are familiar with, suggested that personality was largely set in stone by the age of 5 or so. And even many modern day psychologists suggest that our overall personality is pretty fixed and usually pretty much stable throughout our life. But I am saying it is usually the case, and I'm going to make the case for the opposite being true in some cases, but I have to give a little background in order to do that. We have to kind of look at where our personality comes from in the first place. So, what are the factors that really shape personality? Well, one of the primary factors is our genetics, and we know this for a few reasons, but studying twins has been really helpful in determining this. So, identical twins that are actually reared apart will often still have remarkably similar personality assessments and interests, but again, that's not always the case, and we know also from research that our upbringing and our culture also helps to shape our personality, and of course our experiences do. So there's kind of this debate between whether nature or nurture really has more to do with our personality formation, but really it's a mixture of the two. So that is where we can find the argument that personality factors can actually be changed somewhat because they aren't all a product of our genetics. So one of the ways that we can measure our personalities to begin with is by using the 5-factor model of personality, and the major traits that we can look for are openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So these are all measured on a scale of low to high, and how these scores kind of interact with one another gives us really our personality assessment. I actually just did a video all about neuroticism, and I will be doing the other 4 traits following soon, but that was kind of a deep dive into that singular personality factor, and I'm bringing that up because it is actually related to the answer of this question, which I will circle back to in a moment. But first I want to kind of lay down that foundation, which is that many experts do believe that although our personality is pretty set, that if we can change our behavior patterns and our thought patterns, our habits, and even the beliefs that really lie underneath the surface of our personality traits, then there is actually true hope for personality change in these areas if we really want there to be. And I will personally attest to the fact that indeed personality traits can be altered. I have seen it distinctly in my life after intentionally working on a personality 100 million% this personality type to the T. And it does not change because, like I said, it does not directly measure neuroticism, which I think has definitely influenced my personality, which is why I much prefer the 5-factor model of personality, which you can also find online. Just Google it. You will find probably 1,000 different versions of the test. And the more honest you are with your answers, the more self-awareness that you have, the more accurate your personality assessment is going to be. So it's important you don't try to answer the questions thinking about how you would prefer to be as a person, but think about how you actually are and answer as honestly as possible. And you should get a pretty accurate personality assessment. So just like the Myers-Briggs personality test, where I had the same personality type come up over and over and over again, that was the case for me for years and years and years with the 5-factor model of personality, which used to be for openness to experience, ridiculously high, like almost 100% on the scale, which just means I'm curious, open-minded, imaginative. So that one makes perfect sense. For conscientiousness, mid to low, which is something I am not particularly happy about. I do not really admire this quality about myself, and it's something that I have to be consciously aware of working on all the time. And that has a lot to do with being cautious, having self-discipline, having a lot of order and organization, which are all things that I struggle with naturally. So those are things that I have to work on. For extroversion, I am extremely high in this factor. And for agreeableness, I'm also extremely high. And this has to do with kind of working well with others, social harmony, generosity, kindness, those types of things. So I'm like either really high or really low on most things. And when we get to neuroticism, this is the one that is usually not desirable to score high in. And I was mid-range and sometimes even testing high in neuroticism. So this is exactly the trait that I found the most dire need to work on because I could clearly see it was leading to negative outcomes, which is also true for conscientiousness, but that one I'm also working on. But going back to the neuroticism, it has several key facets, and not all of them were affecting me. So with neuroticism, the facets are anxiety, hostility, depression, self-consciousness, impulsiveness, and vulnerability. And really, I didn't struggle with many of these, but it was the facet of anxiety that was causing huge issues for me, and somewhat impulsiveness and a few other things that were negative. But really, I had just so much trouble with catastrophic thinking, over analyzing things, worrying about things that are never going to happen, and I was causing myself a lot of internal suffering. And once I realized this and I had a name for it, I decided that I absolutely needed to change this about myself. I didn't want to live this way. And that's why and how I began to learn cognitive behavioral therapy, which I have a video about if you want to go ahead and look up on the YouTube channel, which is just basically a method of psychotherapy that you can learn to even perform on yourself, which is what I did. And it totally changed my life. I talk about this all the time because when I say this changes your life, this totally changes your life. It's not a magic wand. It takes a little time to get used to doing this, but it does totally change your life. And when your life changes to that degree, it can also change your personality, which it absolutely did for me. This is a personality trait that I no longer struggle with. It is not a dominant factor in my personality whatsoever anymore. It's not that I don't experience anxiety. I do experience anxiety sometimes, but because I have really changed the way I deal with it, It is not something that is disruptive in my life anymore. It is not something that causes me constant grief, which it certainly did in the past. And therefore, my personality has changed dramatically because of that. Because it's like I was able to scoop out that problematic area pretty much altogether. So, I definitely feel that because I personally experienced this, that absolutely personality traits can be altered. It came down to changing my thought patterns, looking at my core beliefs, and learning to determine what was irrational thinking. I had negative automatic thoughts and irrational beliefs about so many things, and it just came down to really unlearning these toxic mental habits and rewiring my brain in a way where I could think more rationally and more clearly. And this is just one example. I know, for example, introverts that had wanted to become more extroverted and they were able to successfully alter that trait. Now, I'm not going to say that they are now extroverts, but they exhibited more qualities of extroversion after, changing their habits, changing their thought patterns and their beliefs. And again, that doesn't mean that we should do this. It doesn't mean that introversion is less desirable than extroversion. It's all a matter of perception. And it's just also whether or not our personality traits are allowing us to lead the life that we want to lead. So that's going to differ in opinion for every single person. Every person will have preferences and thoughts about what personality traits that they personally find to be more desirable. Some people do not find extroversion to be desirable in any capacity. They find it to be obnoxious. So again, it is all a matter of perception. And really, most of the time, we can work with our personalities, we can work with our strengths, and we can design a lifestyle that is really in alignment with that. But if we want to change something, there is definitely hope. And much of our behavior has to do with habits. And when we change our habits, we pretty much alter everything. So if we want to change our personality traits, we need to begin to focus on our thoughts, our beliefs, and our habits. If we can slowly change these aspects, then we can expect that there will be at least some change and growth in that area. And remember also that perception and mindset really is everything. So we have to believe that it is possible for it to become possible to have this change occur. So my answer to the question is yes, I do believe that we can, in many cases, change certain facets of our personality if we are willing to put in the inner work. Okay, let's move on to the next question, which is really interesting, and that is it true that opposites really attract? And if so, do they work well in a relationship together? I love this question, and even though I usually stick to questions about personal development, I think understanding relationships is extremely important, and so I think it is a very valuable question to answer. So, of course, we have conflicting messages within our culture, which are opposites attract, and then we have birds of a feather flock together. So, this question could really have a whole podcast dedicated to itself trying to answer it, but I'll give you the short version, which is that both of these statements are true in their own way. And it's also different when we are talking about friendships versus romantic relationships. So let's keep this more about relationships because friendships are usually much easier to answer this question in that we tend to have friends that share common interests and common values and common ideologies. We look for people that like the things that we like and usually think in pretty much the same way. Not always the case, but more often than not, that is true. But as far as actual attraction goes, research does indicate that we are very attracted to our opposites in some personality aspects. So, one is introversion versus extroversion. So, it's not uncommon for one to be extremely attracted to the opposite, and they can find it very intriguing and interesting to see things from the other point of view and kind of study how the other type operates. Another opposition is perceiving versus judging. And especially if we're really far on one side, it's almost like we are striving for balance by having a partner with that opposite trait. So, as a whole unit, there is a sense of being kind of well rounded. There's also a tendency to be attracted to people with personality traits that you really admire and feel that you lack in. So, I notice for myself, even within just friendships, that even though I am personally kind of overly creative and definitely an out of the box type of thinker, I have huge respect and admiration for very analytical people, very organized kind of type A people, because that is an area that I am lacking in. So I'm drawn to people that excel in that area. And the same might go for, let's say, a very timid or self conscious person being fascinated and attracted to an extremely confident person because, again, it's something they find admirable. So, even though it can be challenging having a relationship with someone who is different in these areas, they can often kind of work because when the two pieces come together as a couple, they have a great balance of strengths and weaknesses and they can kind of help each other out. Whereas two wild extroverted people may have trouble sitting down doing the mundane stuff like paying the bills, but when you have two people with differing qualities and strengths, that type of thing can become easier. But there is a second part to this, and that is that birds of a feather do often flock together, especially in key areas that have to do with morals and values and in life goals and in life direction. So while they may be very different in their personal, interests or their actual personalities, they are still on the same wavelength. They are still kind of traveling in the same direction. They may have a different way of getting there, which can be both frustrating and endearing to the other person, but more or less what matters to them is common. So the answer to the question is that yes, opposites do often attract and opposites do often work very well together, but they do need to have common values and some areas where they see completely eye to eye, or the relationship is going to travel in two different directions, which is very difficult to make work. Okay, the next question I think a lot of people are going to be able to relate to, and that is how do you stay inspired when life seems to be downgrading all of the time? I'm finding it hard to stay excited about life when there seems to be so much bad news. And this question I think I get in some version every single week, and I got it kind of in a different way multiple times for this podcast. So definitely we need to answer this. And I think the first thing is that gratitude. Gratitude is huge. And I have a whole video about this coming out in like 2 days. So I will be elaborating on that much more there. But we've got to focus on the good stuff in order to keep on going in life. We have good things still in our life. It's just sometimes difficult to notice and appreciate them in the moment, especially when we are so distracted by everything that is negative that's going on. But that is huge. And like I said, we will be discussing that in much greater detail shortly. So we'll move on from that. But another thing is mindfulness. We are never really in the moment anymore. So, how can we possibly stay inspired? We can't do anything while we aren't scrolling on the phone at the same time or drinking a latte and just being mentally 50 different places at once. That's why when we actually go to see a movie or sit down and read a book, it seems to affect us so much because we let ourselves get immersed without distractions. We experience it. It's almost like we live in it for a while, so it truly enriches us. If we watch that same movie at home, we are just kind of halfway watching it while we fold laundry and we are answering questions for our kids. We're on Facebook at the same time. And so, of course, we don't get inspired. It's like it doesn't affect us in any way because we are not truly present for it. So, point blank, when we are present in life, we stay inspired because life is actually interesting. There are so many interesting things. We don't have to feel like everything is downgrading externally if internally we are inspired and focused on whatever we are engaging in, whatever we are interested in. I took nearly a 2 year break from watching TV as a part of almost a mindfulness training and just to kind of focus on what really added value to my life. But when I went back to watching TV, I did so with complete intention and attention. So the programming I watch now really makes me think and takes me somewhere emotionally or it triggers new interests. So very careful about what I watch. I still don't watch much TV, but what I do watch, I find very interesting and I definitely engage in. One of the shows that I really love is Vikings on the History Channel. When I began watching that show, I thought about all the philosophical conversations that the characters were having, and I found myself becoming interested in Norwegian folklore and history, and I started doing a bunch of research on that. So just being present for that led to new interests and inspirations just because of a television show. So the same could go for anything, and of course, in a much bigger way. The same thing goes for, let's say, walking outside. When I go outside, I always study the architecture of buildings. I like to look at how things are made. I especially love mid century modern architecture, and I like to admire these beautiful buildings whenever I run across them. And when you have that curiosity about life, everything is interesting and everything becomes inspiring. And this all comes from being mindful. Everything and anything can be a spark of interest for you. Just looking all around you all the time, just taking it all in, living it, not just surviving it, not just existing without experiencing every moment of it. So, that is my best advice. Find the things that spark your interest and let them snowball. Stay curious, try new things, get out of the comfort zone. Don't get preoccupied with bad news because there is always going to be bad news, and that does not mean that life can't be great. So keep learning, keep expanding, and you can start finding what you feel is inspiring by just being present in anything and everything that you are doing. And I know that sounds so simple, but if we think about how few people actually live this way, it is mind blowing. It's like just a bunch of zombies out there, just kind of zoned out, thinking about really nothing. So if we can, be the exception to the rule and, just get re engaged in life and again, just live the moment that you are in, you will never lack inspiration because inspiration is everywhere. We're just not looking at it. We're not even noticing it. We notice nothing. We're just stuck in our heads all the time. So if we can kind of get out of our heads and open our eyes, we are definitely going to find tons of inspiration wherever we go. So the next questions that I got were just kind of fun, and we don't usually do these types of questions, so I'm going to go ahead and answer them. We had two questions that were actually related. The first one is, do you have any good movie recommendations? And then the second one was, what is your favorite movie and why? So, like I said, this is not so much to do with personal development, but it does have to do with life enjoyment, which is something that is very important to me. So, I am super picky about movies, but I definitely have some favorites. I have to boil them down to categories because it's really just so hard to compare movies that are so different. So, I'll break it down into comedies, dramas, and classics. So, as far as comedies, my favorite movie of all time is probably Spinal Tap. I've seen it a million times and it brings me sincere joy every single time I watch it. My favorite character is Nigel Tufnell, played by Christopher Guest, and I love all the movies that have that same basic cast, such as Best in Show, A Mighty Wind, Waiting for a Guffman. All those movies, love them all. I think these movies are brilliant, and I usually hate seeing movies more than once, but I've actually seen all of these a bunch of times, so I definitely recommend them. Spinal Tap is the oldest, that was kind of the original one. It's like a mockumentary about a rock band, and it's the best. You have to see it. Okay, so moving on to the next one. Classic movies. My favorite classic movie of all times is The Sound of Music. I know it by heart. It reminds me of my childhood, and I love Julie Andrews. My favorite character in this movie is Liesel. I love her blue eyes and her dimples, and I enjoyed her autobiography. It's definitely worth reading if you love the movie also. And for dramas, I really could not decide. I boiled it down to three, which is Cinderella Man, Walk the Line, which is about Johnny Cash, and most recently, Joker. I was deeply moved by each of these movies, and I definitely recommend them all, and they're certainly all thought provoking. Although Joker might be disturbing for some people, so if that type of thing actually triggers you, you may want to avoid it. But I thought it was outstanding. And I'm also going to add another category, even though it is not technically a movie, just because I just finished watching it, which is the Broadway show Hamilton, which is filmed and put on Disney Plus right now. I grew up with musicals, and my family sang show tunes throughout my childhood, and I was involved in theater since I was in like fourth grade. So I really enjoy Broadway shows to begin with, but this is my absolute favorite show of all times, and I thought this film was absolutely incredible. It was moving, and it was such a reminder of how deeply art can affect you internally. And this show just has such a wide spectrum of emotions that are attached to it, and the actors are so immensely talented, but it was so moving. And I just found out that Broadway is now closed until 2021, and I thought that was absolutely heartbreaking. And so I am even more grateful that I got to finally get to see Hamilton, even if it was just on the screen. So I definitely recommend that, even if you aren't a huge fan of musicals. I just think this is just so wonderful. I can't recommend it enough. So those are my recommendations. Please let me know in the comments what your own recommendations are. I would love to hear them. Oh, and also one last recommendation is the Eurovision Song Contest with Will Ferrell that's on Netflix right now. I laughed hysterically throughout the whole thing and still managed to cry somehow at the end. So again, full spectrum, so you have to check that out also. So those are all my movie recommendations. Okay, so I think we have time really only for one more question. So the question I'm going to choose is, I can't believe this year is half over. 2020 has definitely not been what I expected. Do you have any tips for making the second half better than the first? Well, I certainly can't change what is going to happen in the external world, in the 3D reality outside, but the advice I can offer you is that we've got to learn to be less reactive to these external circumstances because, again, these are things that we cannot control, and the more we focus on the negative, the more it's just going to bring us down. And this year has just been relentless as far as negative news. And not only is it negative news, it's negative news that is airing 24 hours a day. It's on the news, it's in social media, it's everywhere you go, and everybody is talking about it. So it is really just all consuming. So I think we need to not necessarily shut off the news, but first of all, limit our news consumption to getting just the facts as needed and then moving on with our lives. We don't want to hear the same repeated news over and over and over. That is psychologically damaging, for one. There's just only so much negativity any person can take. And it starts to really skew our own reality because we forget about all the positives that are happening in our life because we're so focused on these current situations. So we have to think about creating our own safe, happy, internal reality at all times so that, it's impossible that we're going to not have any reaction to the things that happen externally, but that we have some balance in our life and we remember that there are still so many positives. We don't have to be consumed by everything that is happening out there. We can kind of do our own thing. And something that I always say to my clients is we've got to be clear about what we want our life to look like. So if we're just kind of just getting wrapped up in whatever comes our way, we're not going to have a lot of life satisfaction. But if we, sit down and make a list of what we want to include in our life, what is missing now, what are goals that we can work towards? Because whenever we are working towards goals, we feel happier, we feel more fulfilled, and we feel like our life is going in a better direction. It's always about the journey. It never really has to do too much, believe it or not, with that final destination. When we are taking those positive steps, we feel like there is progress in our life. We feel like there is movement and not movement going backwards, which is how we can often feel when we are getting so consumed with what's going outside in the world, but thinking about how we can personally move forward. Because let's face it, for many people right now, and that could include anybody, there are things that we wouldn't have chosen to happen right now. Whether that be we are homeschooling our children, or we no longer have our job, or we have to work at home, and that's something that we don't really prefer to do. There's going to be inconveniences that we are experiencing. So we have to make sure that we are creating balance in our life by intentionally putting the things in our life that do make us happy and making sure that that is a priority for us, and making sure that, as always, I always say this, but that we are taking care of ourselves, because when we get so stressed out, that's the first thing that gets tossed out the window. We forget self-care completely and we just go into that downward spiral. So make sleep a priority. Make sure you are getting outside. Go running, go walking. Make yourself do it even when you don't feel like doing it, because once you're actually doing it, you enjoy it. Do things like meditation and journaling. And again, these are not new concepts, but these are the things that are actually effective in changing our life. It is not about having, that magic wand, like I said. There is a formula to having a happy life, and that is having a life that has balance, a life that is focused on the positive things, and a life where we are moving in a direction that is in alignment with our goals and our values, and that we are consistently taking at least tiny steps forward. And if we are doing this, we will be able to get through the different setbacks that happens. Who knows what's going to happen for the second half of 2020? Wow, 2020 has just been so interesting. So who knows what is going to happen? But we do know that no matter what happens, I always say this, but we are a survivor. We will get through it. So we just have to focus on making our life the life that we choose it to be. And remembering that we do design our life. We don't design the external factors, but we design where we place our energy, what our mindset is, and where our focus is. And that is how our whole reality is truly created. So you need to reconnect with yourself. You need to spend time without the phone, without social media, and just search your heart. think about what you do want your life to be and determine whether or not you are taking steps towards that life or steps away from that life. And sometimes you just need that quiet space to really be able to determine that and to be able to be honest with yourself, because we fill our lives with so many distractions. We are so busy and crazy and life is so loud, and we need to pull back sometimes and really focus on where we want to be headed in the future. And if we think about that, if we do this on a regular basis, the rest of 2020 is going to be just fine, because no matter what happens outside, inside, we're going to be okay. And we're going to be, again, moving in the direction that we want to go in. So that is where I am going to end it. I am so sorry for those of you who sent in questions that I did not get to. I will get to them in the next podcast. And as usual, a few of them are just too detailed to be part of questions and answers. So I'm going to need to kind of address the topics on their own. So I will certainly do that for at least 2 or 3 of these that I'm looking at. And please continue to send in the questions, because I find them so interesting and I love your insight. And I think that from the feedback, other people are really enjoying the questions that you sent in. So keep them coming. You can reach me at nena.lavonne@gmail.com, and that is spelled NENA.LAVONNE at Gmail. And you can also reach me on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is at Nena Lavonne. So thank you so much for spending time with me today. It's always a pleasure, and I greatly look forward to talking to you next time. See you soon.